Thank you very much, and hello, Barcelona. I do love this town. Thank you very much, Nuria. Thank you very much, Jordi. Jordi took me around all today to accelerators and incubators, and there was so much stuff going on, and we were going so fast, and he was keeping us on time. When I get back to the States, I'm going to start a brand new thing. It's called, for startup founders, it's called a D-accelerator. And the D-accelerator, we're going to be hanging on the beach, drinking beers with our laptops. So anyone who wants to come, I'm going to be taking applications. I'm really fired up to be here today and talk to you guys about the startup J-curve. The truth is, and you guys have all heard this, that most people say the vast majority of startups will fail. Okay, and well, to some extent that might be true. But what I'm going to tell you here today is going to greatly increase your odds of success. And that's why I wrote the book, is to get you from success, so from where you are right now to success in the shortest possible time. What I noticed over the past I've been an entrepreneur for 35 years. I've got the hairline to show it. I've started or co-founded 15 companies. I've invested in another 60 startups. I started angel investing about 20 years ago. And what I've noticed is that startups, what I've noticed over that period of time is that startups follow a very well-defined path. And it's a path that I just kept seeing again and again and again and again. And so what I decided to do is to chart that path and create a map so that future entrepreneurs such as yourselves could look at the map and they could know exactly where they are, what's going on, what to do, and how to get to the destination, okay? And so that's what I'm going to go through today. And I'm also going to spend a little bit of time talking about the concept of failure. Because to really be a successful entrepreneur, I think you got to make your peace with failure, and you got to understand the role that failure plays. And I'm going to show you how to make failure. I'm going to show you how to turn it from your most feared enemy into your most valuable ally on your path to success. And finally, and don't let me forget this, Jordi, finally, before we finish, I'm going to tell you how you can become a billion-dollar company. All right. And I'm going to tell you in under a minute. It's not going to take long. So first, let's start with what I call the myth, right? And the myth is that every founder, including myself, and I still fall for it, is that you start off the journey here, right? You've got an idea, and it's really cool, and everyone gets all psyched up about it, and then you get your team together, and you raise a little money, and you build your product, and the line is going up, right? The value of the company is going up, the experience is getting more fun, and everything else. And then you release your product, and that's great. And then like lots of customers come, and you start making money, and then you get that big hockey stick at the end where you're killing it, And somewhere up there, you sort of retire to your wonderful Paradise Island, and you're sipping rum drinks and checking your stock portfolio. The problem is, and what's the revenue? A lot. And how long does it take? What's the time access? Really short. So that's the myth. And let me tell you what really happens, at least what happens, and it's not 100% of the time, but I've asked many dozens of people, venture capitalists and so forth, and rough guess is about 90% of the time, this is what goes on. And some people think it goes on 100% of the time, but let's. So the startup J-curve is the map. It's in the form of a J. I'll give you a little sneak preview of that, but you already know it. And it's divided up into 6 distinct phases, okay? The first stage is called create. And, we call it create because that's what you're doing. You're creating the idea, or you have the idea. You're creating the team. It's either you or you and a partner, or maybe 2 or 3 partners. And you're getting the money together so you can the resources, so you can actually sort of, start down this path. And of the idea, the team, and the money, let's go through the order of importance in reverse. The least important item is the money. Why? Because it doesn't take much to start. I mean, It very little, and it's always available somewhere if you look hard enough. You know, whether it's Uncle Jim or something you got saved away or whatever it is. That's the least important one. The second least important, the second most important or least important item is the idea. And the most important thing is the people, to me. Now, it's been debated forever in venture capital circles and angel circles, like, what's more important, the team or the idea, team or idea? Or some people even say the market. You know, I come down clearly on the side of the people, and I'm going to explain to you why. The founding team is the most important thing. A couple interesting things about the founding team. The data shows that it's better to have 2 founding members than it is to be a solo act. So solo acts, you know, have happened and do happen and can work, but history shows, and the data shows, and I've seen extensive studies, that 2 is better than 1. Why is 2 better than 1? You make better decisions, and your founding partner should have skills that are complementary to yours. So the classic is you got the tech person, and you've got the marketing person, you know, or the front the front guy or gal. And if you think about it, you know, let's look at it. Some of the great partners: Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, right? Google. Dave Filo, Jerry Yang at Yahoo. And if you think about it, the kind of list goes on. And classically, that's what makes the best team. I was thinking, well, that's not true of Larry Ellison. He's been a solo act for a long time. And I was reminded, not true. Larry Ellison had a partner named, I think, Dave Miner. And, so if you look hard enough, 2's better than 1. And so, but that founding team has to go through so much. And what I'm going to show you is the idea is interesting and it's good to have a great idea and it's good to have a good market. But the idea changes, and that's what we're going to go through. Ideas are also, if you just were to value the idea by itself, my partner and I think the idea is worth about 5%, about 5% of the company. It's not a huge number because the execution is so important. Ideas, typically, you have a visionary, you have an idea that'll solve a problem, like, for example, Dollar Shave Club. Well, the problem is, I'm really upset that I got to pay so much for a package of Gillette razors, so I'm going to start Dollar Shave Club. And if you look hard enough at everyday life, and you can train yourself to do this, you can actually, you can see what the problems, they're around us all the time, every day. So, and they can also be visionary, and they can also be opportunistic. But let's go in, what I call the create phase is it's dreams unburdened by reality. It's a PowerPoint presentation, okay? And it's a good one, and by all means, you should have a PowerPoint deck and do a good presentation, but it's dreams unburdened by reality. And the reality starts to come in the release phase, because the next phase, release, is hard. We all know that. Anyone here has released a product, and probably most of you had, it's incredibly hard. Why is it hard? Some practical issues, like it's just plain old, usually takes 2 or 3 times as long as you think it's going to take to actually build stuff. But also there are interesting psychological sort of blocks, like a fear of failure, fear of being judged once it's released, feature creep is another problem, perfectionism is a big issue, and then some people just kind of get in tinkering syndrome, which often happens at like university labs and things like this. They just want to tinker. They enjoy the tinkering. They don't really want to release it and so forth. And so releasing products is incredibly hard. The most important thing is just get the darn thing out there. Push that boulder off and get the product out there. Why is it important to just get the product out and to not necessarily make it perfect? By the way, if you're Elon Musk making spaceships, you should make it perfect, or for that matter, a car. But generally speaking, you just want to get the product out there. Why? Because, I would argue, what happens when most products are released from startups is nothing. you always say crickets. All you hear is chirping crickets because the first product in my experience almost never works. You know, and if you're not prepared for that, it's a bit devastating, right? Because you told your investors, you poured your heart and soul into this thing, you worked your butt off, and like the big moment, and you know, you get it out there and nothing's happening. It's like, you know, showing up at your wedding and like, you know, the bride or groom like doesn't show up, and it's terribly awkward. So the next phase is probably the most important phase and the hardest, and that's morph. And morph is when you take, you know, you get over the fact that the initial thing didn't sell, and there's almost always a small glimmer of hope in every product release. And sometimes you got to look pretty darn hard for it, but it's almost always out there. And you try and find that glimmer of hope, that little spark, and you have to build on that spark. You imagine like a tiny fire, right? And you just have to keep, you know, adding things to it and build it into a big bonfire. And you've got to, at the same time, which is psychologically and emotionally very difficult to do, you got to get rid of the stuff that nobody cares about, right? Because nobody cares. And you need to do it quick, and you need to do it through a series of iterations. I call it morph because it's a metamorphosis. And much like the image here of the butterflies, you know, you sort of start off here, and you know, you're progressing, and by the end of it, you don't look like the little thing hanging on the twig. You're a beautiful butterfly. It flies away, and it is a great analogy. And let me give you a few examples. Who has ever heard of a product called bourbon? And I'm not talking about the kind you drink, which we'll do later. Who's ever heard of bourbon? And that's kind of the point. So bourbon was a mobile app that was a check-in app, you know, basically like Foursquare. And they built it, and they spent a fair amount of money and got a fair amount of buzz on it. And it got out there, and it just, you know, very, very lackluster results. You know, had some downloads. People weren't using it. And the founding team did exactly the right thing. They said, you know what? Nobody cares about our app, but what I do see people doing is they seem to like taking photos. And they're like, just send the photos. And like they comment on them. And they're like, what if we just bagged everything else, that check-in part, and we just became a photo app? So that's what became Instagram. The rest is history. I don't have to explain what that is. Who knows what audio is? Exactly. Audio was a podcasting app. And these guys raised a fair amount of money at it, and they spent a lot of time and effort at it, and they created this podcasting app. You know, it wasn't terribly wonderful, but they released it. And about the time they released it, or shortly thereafter, Apple came out with the iTunes Store and, you know, the iPod and so forth. And it's like, you know, it wasn't going to happen. Now, if you look closely at that image, you'll notice one symbol, which became Twitter, because basically the company was, you know, going to go under. And Evan Williams, I think it was, or one of them said, hey, you know, I got this crazy idea for, you know, sending status updates to our friends. So, I don't know, let's try it. So they tried it, and sure enough, they saw that wonderful customer traction. Who knows what the point is? And that's the point. The point was referred to a tipping point, and what it was is it was aimed at solving social problems and raising money for charity. And the point, and you sort of, you know, you get your friends together and you know, you like raise money for something, and then if you hit a certain number, then, you know, they'd go ahead and give it to the charity. And so, and you could see the, you know, the old screen on the left, and it wasn't working at all. Nobody really cared. It was kind of eh. And so the guy said, you know, there's a pizza shop downstairs. What if we use this sort of technology and said, you know, hey, you know, if enough of you get together, we'll give you really cheap pizzas. and that became Groupon. And so those are sort of somewhat oversimplified, but that is reality, that is history, and you could look that all up. And so, these wonderful stories and these myths going on in the startup world, that like Groupon, like, whoa, it just like took off. They hit it, they nailed it, they raised all the money. It's really not what happened. And, these are just a few. I won't bore you with all of them, but PayPal was security software for the Palm Pilot. Slack was a massive multiplayer online game. I can't say all this first. And it had a chat feature, and people loved the chat feature. And inside the company Slack, they used to use the chats feature to like, hey, you do this, and have you done that yet? And da-da-da-da. Nobody cared about the game, by the way. The game was a bomb. And they're like, well, everyone seems to like this chat thing. So anyway, that was Slack. One of my favorites is, to show you this isn't a new phenomena, William Wrigley was not in the chewing gum business. He was in the baking soda business. He sold baking powder. And in order to sell the baking powder, he used to include a little package of chewing gum. People didn't like the baking powder that much. They loved the chewing gum. So he ended up in the chewing gum business. So the process, as I described earlier, is you release your product. By all means, try. And you know what? You might be the 1 in 10 or 1 in 20, depending on what you believe, that actually works. I think to some extent, in fairness, like Facebook was a little bit like that. Although you could argue not totally, because Mark had already kind of seen other iterations of it, so he had a little bit of a shortcut. But it kind of took off. But again, you could argue even that one. So, but the process is there's when your first product hits the market with a thud, look for the glimmer of light, morph towards it, create another iteration towards that little spark of fire, and leave behind the stuff that's not working. Keep that cycle going till you hit massive customer traction, significant customer traction. And I'm not talking about the customer traction that you buy on Facebook. Right? That's not customer traction. Customer traction is like when it really gets going. It's a little viral. You can feel it. They're pulling it out of your hands, right? You're not getting new users because you spent more money on Facebook or Google. It's like, it's happening. You'll feel it. You'll know it. So I wasn't sure where to put this slide in here. This slide I put up there because what's going on at this point in the life of a startup, where we are on the map, what we're talking about now, it's tough, okay? It's very, very tough. And you can see, if you remember you could see we're down here, right? It was not hockey stick, we're down here. It is lonely, and it is cold, and it's long. I call it the long, cold winter. But once you start getting that customer traction, that is exciting. And then, and I would argue only then, it's fine to talk about your business model beforehand, and that's okay. I'm all for that, because ultimately you do need to nail the business model. But before you know exactly what the product is, I would argue focus on the product, get massive customer traction. Think about the model, have an idea of the model, but get massive customer traction, and then go to the model. And the model, people I see this all the time. They blow right by the model, right? They're like, hey, we got customers. Scale it, baby. Get this thing going. And, that just doesn't work because it doesn't make a business. If you don't have a good business model, you don't have a business. And importantly, there's a big, big difference between a weak business model and a strong business model. And, there's lots of ways you can quantify it, but basically it comes down to margins. Your margins are probably the best single indicator of how strong your business model is. If you're sitting there in a low margin business, good luck, but it's tough sailing. You make one mistake and things get a little wobbly and it's not pretty. High margin business is an indication of a strong business model, and you need to spend time, I believe, and I want to encourage you to spend time developing the business model, thinking about the business model. At a company I helped co-found called FlexJobs, we wanted to create a site for telecommuters so that work at home and stay at home moms and dads could participate in the workforce in the U.S. And so the classic sort of, job site model is, you bring in the resumes and so forth, and then you charge the HR, the human resource departments of companies to post their job postings. And we tried that, and God, it was a disaster, because it turns out the one department in every company that's probably got to be the hardest department to get money out of is the HR department, because no budget, no anything, nobody cares, and they're very slow moving. And God bless them, but that's just the way it is. And so we noticed we had all these people coming in who really, really wanted to participate, and they wanted really good jobs, and they really appreciated the fact that we were curating these jobs and sifting through them, because there was a lot of bad ones out there. And so we worked really hard to bring all the best jobs. And so we said, well, what if we just flip it? What if we don't charge the employers to post the jobs? And what if we actually charge, which is somewhat unheard of, what if we charge the people who want to get the jobs? And we flipped it in took about 2 days to change around the software, and the company just took off from there. And that's totally because we spent time, frankly, out of desperation at that moment, to really focus on the business model. The next part of the J curve is scale. And the first 4 phases, those are really sort of the long, cold winter. And then once you have really significant customer traction and real customer traction, and once you have a strong business model, and only then is it time to scale. Scale is just where you're going to make everything bigger. And the most important thing is what I just said, is that you must nail the product and you must nail the business model before you scale. Nail before you scale. Really simple. Do not scale before you nail. If you scale before you nail, the problem is you're taking a weak product and a weak business model, which you're probably losing money on, and you're just making it bigger. Right? And that just makes a bigger problem. And it's just probably torching a lot of money, and you're probably going to have to, you'll know it because you'll be blowing through a lot of money, and you won't be getting very far. And it doesn't end well. So nail before you scale. Think about it as a race car. You could take this race car here, and you know what? If some nuts and bolts were a little loose, didn't have much gas, everything wasn't going perfect, it'll make it around the track a few times, no problem, But you get that thing up to 200 miles an hour, and parts are going to start flying everywhere, and someone's going to get hurt. And so think about that. Everything's got to be pretty nailed down before you scale it. There's some very interesting challenges with scaling. To me, and I go through them in the book, but to me, I'm going to mention one of the most interesting to me, is that scaling requires different people skills. And usually, but not always, that means different people or different types of people. And through the first 4 phases of the long, cold winter, these are good old-fashioned American cowboys. And cowboys are known as they're resourceful, they're independent, they can do lots of different stuff. You can brand the cattle, you can cook the coffee, make the coffee, you can cook the pork and beans. Cowboys are great, like when you're out there lonely in that long, cold winter. And that's what you'll want. Generalists who are good at lots of stuff and, independent enough, but can still work together. When you go into scale, these guys are actually a little dangerous because they're riding around. You want siloed people who are experts at what they do. Experts at finance, VP of finance, experts at marketing, experts at sales, experts at customer service, and you need specialists who have been there, done that. And they're really good. And by the way, they don't really do anything else because they've been doing that particular siloed function for years, and they're damn good at it. Right? So no more generalists. Generalists just gum up the works. Right? When scaling, get out of the way, hire the domain trained experts, and let them do their job, put them in place. But as you can imagine, that's a big culture clash, right? The startup team's like, whoa, dude, we're kind of losing our culture here. You know, this isn't like as much fun, you know. So you get into some really interesting things. And of course, the trick is that each member of the founding team needs to pick one specific thing and just go do that. And it's very hard, but that's the only way those people actually can stay and contribute. Otherwise, you know, they could be in the way. So it's a very interesting problem of scaling, and of course opportunity, because it's fun. I mean, things are starting to take off. The final phase is the most fun, and that's called harvest. And harvest is when, you know, you have the professionals in, you've scaled the business. At this point, it's starting to throw off significant cash, or it definitely should be. You're not in harvest mode unless, if you stop the growth, you stopped hiring and everything else, for a few months, cash should start piling up in the bank account. And when you can do that, you're in harvest mode. And if you can't do that, you're not, and maybe you should go back and work on the model, and you should probably pause a little bit. So harvest is fun, definitely. Harvest, you have all sorts of wonderful, what I call puffball decisions. A puffball decision is heads I win, tails I win. Do I do more growth, or do I do more profitability? Do I invest in the brand, or do I do, acquisitions? Tuck-in technology acquisitions. What do I do with all this money? Do I distribute it? Do I do buybacks? Or, hey, we're doing so well, why don't we do an IPO? And that is what I call kind of nirvana. It's fun, definitely. So that's the J-curve, and I'm going to talk about a couple of particular, aspects now that we kind of have that framework. I see, wherever I go, and it's been really fun actually going around the country and around the world talking about the book and meeting entrepreneurs like yourselves. I mean, it's awesome. And I'm in awe of all you folks out there, for undertaking this fun and crazy adventure. One thing I see that is kind of, where people's, have this conception of a startup. The reason this is up here, this is the Stonehenge, and it's monoliths, right? So I see startup people having this sort of monolithic idea of what a startup is. And that is, you start it and you raise money right at the get-go, and then you build your product, and then you raise more money, and then you do revert, and then you release and raise more money, and it's like it just keeps on going, and this is great. And like we all want to be VC funded, and stuff like that. And what I say in the book is there's lots of ways to start up heaven, okay? It does not have to be like that. Many of my best and favorite companies did not go that route. For some reason, VCs always hate my ideas, so I got forced to do it other ways. Generally, I mean, there's been some exceptions. But so think about before you run out and raise lots of money, and by the way, take on huge amounts of responsibility and sometimes baggage. Think about how far can you get on your own? How much do you really need? How many people do you really have to hire? Because by the way, in the hard part, the long cold winter, the answer is not much. Big teams are not going to help you in the long cold winter. In fact, they can hinder you, right? Because too many people with too many ideas. Small, effective teams are better, and it's not that expensive. Not as expensive, at least, as people think. The type of corporation. Should it really be a corporation? Maybe it should be a partnership. Maybe you should own it all, 100%. Is there a way you can do that? So I just have this, concept of startups, which is a much bigger tent and a much more open and broad opportunity than this just like, got to do this, run off on this VC model. So the interesting thing about the J-curve in terms of funding, because I am aware and I'm sympathetic to the fact that, funding is always a looming issue. But what the J-curve shows is, look, value actually goes down for a while there, right? It's hard to raise money after you've released your product. Why? Data. I mean, nothing kills a good story like data. You know, the minute you release a product, great, how are your users, what's the engagement, you know, what's your expected customer lifetime value, blah, 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 blah. I mean, you know, like I apologize for investors, but like that's what we do. You know, we ask questions. And so the two easiest places to raise money are at the very beginning when you've got this wonderful spreadsheet and your dream's unburdened by reality. And, you know, how can you poke holes in it? If someone pokes holes in it, you just go and change the spreadsheet. And when you're exiting the long, cold winter and going into scale, because people understand that, right? They look at the data and the data looks pretty good. I want to introduce the concept of what I call ramen profitability. Ramen profitability is that you're making enough money so that the founders can buy enough ramen noodles to subsist. And it's kind of a funny concept. But think about it. If you're making enough money that you can sort of, you know, exist and feed yourself, you know, you've proven that you can build a product, you've proven you can release a product, you've proven you can sell a product, and you've proven that you don't need more money, technically. Right? It's a wonderful place to be. So think about ramen profitability. And I promised I would talk about failure, and Jordy is a very timely fellow, so I got to... The good news for you all is I'm going to go through the failure part a little quick. But failure is a super important and interesting thing. It's a cultural issue in every culture. And yeah, we're a little bit better in Silicon Valley, maybe. But listen, it's a cultural issue that everyone needs to get over. You start in the classroom like, you failed. Whoa, you screwed up. That's bad, 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 bad. I got to go talk to your teacher, you know, your parents or whatever. And I certainly had plenty of those moments. You know, we're thought, this is one of the great lines from American sports casting, which is Jim McKay saying, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. And God, you know, you hear that and you're like, whoa, that poor guy who's tumbling off a ski jump. It wasn't pretty. But the reality is, you can't get significant reward unless you take risk. I mean, it doesn't, trust me, I've looked everywhere. Doesn't happen. You want a risk-free return? U.S. government bonds, it'll pay you about 0.5%. The government German bonds, I think you got to pay them to hold your money. I mean, that's risk-free, right? Who wants that? None of us in this room, right? So risk is part of it, and you can't take risk without taking on failure, right? So we get to, I had to name it something. I call it love paradox. Love's paradox. The success of the enterprise depends on your ability to fail. Now, there's a couple of important concepts. When you think about failure, divide it up into two ways. You do not, under any circumstances, want to let the enterprise fail. You cannot, should not, and you do everything in your power to not let the enterprise fail. So I want to make that perfectly clear. However, the paradox is, in order for the enterprise not to fail, you need to embrace the day-to-day failures, because the day-to-day failures are going to instruct you and teach you about what's going on. You release the product, it doesn't work, well, you're learning that the market doesn't care about this and it does care about that, right? So embracing that failure and the fact that the first product just might not work is critical, because you're going to learn what they do like. This learning and this, what I call embracing failure and failing fast and failing successfully, what you call it, it's all about time and money. Time and money is runway, and we've all got limited runway, particularly in that early stage. And once you figure out what doesn't work, you can take those resources and invest them and reallocate them into something that actually is going to work. So failing successfully, you know, the simple story of it is you got to look at the data. People like to get around and, you know, sit around and have beers and like, hey, it'll work, or it's going to work, or it sort of works. No, look at the data. The data doesn't lie. So one thing that doesn't lie, and this is Abraham Lincoln, great American president, who's known as Honest Abe. Honest Abe doesn't lie either. Intellectual honesty is what ultimately saves you. Looking at the data, intellectually honest, it works, it doesn't work, let's not kid around if it doesn't work, let's celebrate. Celebrate failure. I see more and more of this going on in the U.S. It's going on. I was just up at Slush in Finland. Supercell, which is a super successful company, they celebrate failure with champagne and they celebrate success with beer. So what a wonderful way to just break that habit, right? That failure is what it is. Thomas Edison, one of the great American entrepreneurs, quote, I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways it won't work. There's another interpretation of that quote that maybe he said, it's a little unclear. He says, I didn't fail building the light bulb 10,000 times. It just, to invent the light bulb took 10,000 steps. IBM, one of the great tech companies of the last 100 years in the US, was primarily put on the map and founded by this fellow, by Thomas Watson. And so he said this, I don't know the exact date on this, but I'm taking a wild guess. It's probably almost 100 years ago, or it's certainly, no, it's not 100 years. What am I talking about? It's 60 plus years ago, whatever. It's a very long time ago. It was before they had color portrait photos, apparently. So he's saying it back then. This isn't this new, like, embrace failure or whatever. This isn't a new, trendy concept. Thomas Watson, founder of IBM, the fastest way to succeed is to double your failure rate. So think about that. Make failure your friend, your most trusted ally. So that's the startup J-curve. I did promise to do one more thing, and that is how to build a billion-dollar company. Really simple. Build a great company, and when you exit that J-curve, when you exit the long cold winter, it's very interesting. What happens very often is competitors see what's going on, and they come in and they say, and they get a little ticked off because you're starting to take their customers and stuff like that, and they say, someone go buy that little son of a gun over there, and just go lowball them, whatever. And so they go over and they want to buy you out. It's 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, whatever it is. And I just want to be the guy that tells you, don't do that, don't take that offer. It's going to be very tempting because you're coming off the long, cold winter, and you remember that picture out there in the tundra, right? It's pretty cold, and so it says, hey, here's, The problem is, by the time the government and everyone, you're not going to end up with much, right, by the end of taxes. And the way you become a billion-dollar company is you say no to that offer, and you say no to the $50 million offer, and you say no to the $100 million offer, and you say no to the $200 million offer, and the $500 million offer. And when someone says, I'll offer you $1 billion, call me. We could talk. Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook had 14 offers through the period of Facebook, okay? It was NBC, News Corp, Google, Microsoft, IAC, on and on and on. I mean, he took the calls, and then he just put his hood up and walked out of the room. And what I want to leave you with is startups are a journey. The J-curve and other things is a map that is going to help you on that journey. But enjoy the journey. The destination is the journey. The journey is the destination. So God bless you all. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for having me to Barcelona. It's been awesome. And I really appreciate it. And God bless you on your startup journey.